Today we're going to focus on one thing and one thing only. Check out how Genshin Impact runs on the Realme GT NEO 3, what people say is one of the best phone with Dimensity 8100 chip, and see if it's really better than the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. Let's get started. Selamat pagi! Good morning everyone, Kenneth here. Welcome to my Genshin Impact benchmark test, which is the first one in my two-part video testing the performance of the Realme GT NEO 3. My full disclosure is down below if you want to help me support the channel. I would very much appreciate your super thanks. Also, please use the affiliate links down in the description below. And without further ado, let's just jump straight into the test and we'll break it down one by one. So starting off, what I have here is the 150 watt version of the Realme GT NEO 3. So 12 gigs of RAM with 256 gigs of storage. It's running Realme UI 3.0, which is the latest at the time of recording. And just to make sure, we're at 100% battery plugged into my laptop just to keep it topped up until the test begins. So let's unplug it right now and get our first temperature reading. Currently, we're at 38 degrees top, 37 degrees bottom, and about the same at the back, only the bottom part is now 36 degrees. Also, the room doesn't have any AC on, so it's about 30 something degrees. Now, let's fire up Genshin Impact, turn on GT mode, and check out the initial game loading time. So, I always try to start fresh. I first started the phone, closed all application before testing, but the result here was quite a surprise. The game took 82 seconds to load, which is almost double of what the Poco F4 GT managed to achieve with its Snapdragon 8 Gen 1. Maybe it's just a bad run, so I'll not draw a conclusion from this, although I would love to know how much is your loading time, so comment down below if you have the GT NEO 3. As usual, we're running the highest preset here, only now we set the frame rate to 60 FPS. One nice thing about Realme's gaming plugin is we can see the real-time FPS, and before we start, I'll let the phone sit for about 1 minute to let the temperature stabilize and get a more accurate result. Now let's start our benchmark app thanks to WeTestPerfDog and do our first set, open world, fight, and exploration. On our way to the first enemy group here, we can already see the frame rate dipping down to the 40s and GPU usage already at 80%. This is a sign that actually we have little headroom for more stuff coming up. And true to this, not long after the fight started, multiple skills are being used, GPU usage shoots up to maxed out, and FPS dropped to as low as 25. This trend of GPU usage stays as we load new places, and while we're seeing a rather stable 40 FPS in the second fight, these are still counted as small fights. Having said that, I can still control Yelan's running skill, Hu Tao's animation can still manageable, although I still suck at it. It's just when flicking the camera around, you'll notice the FPS dips. Flying down to the larger enemy group below, actually we didn't see any FPS recovery here. They just went under 40 FPS now and pretty much 100% GPU usage throughout. And what this means is every time there's an ultimate burst being used, the chip can't do anything other than just drop the frames as we see it spike down to the 20s, although that quickly jumps back to the normal 30 to 40 FPS afterwards. Honestly speaking, the dips here are not as annoying because it only happens during the busiest of animations. Although as time goes on, the temperature goes up and we can see the phone would struggle more, as we see with this fight on the coast down below. Although there are less enemies now, the FPS actually stayed at the low 30s more than ever, and the lags are happening even after the fight is over. Now after this 2.5 minute fight / exploration set, the phone gets very warm at 47 degrees top and 42 degrees bottom, with the backside being about 1 degree less than the front. So we can see that any longer and the phone would just throttle more, as we're quite literally at the limit here, right? Or are we? Anyways, let's move on to the second part where we go to the Spiral Abyss, test the performance inside a domain, which I hope will give you a good idea of how it'll perform when farming artifacts. And right off the bat, we can see similar maxed out GPU usage just like before, but because there are less assets and shadows to process, we instead see better performance, which now averages between 40 to 50 FPS. So the only factor that makes FPS drop now is the amount of skill effect that's happening. Let's take this one for example. When triggering Chi-Chi's Cryo Burst along with Sucrose's Anemo Burst, we can see a moment where it dropped below 40, though it quickly jumps back up to the 50s, making for an overall very smooth gameplay nonetheless. I'll let this footage play a bit more for you to check out. So at the end of this floor 9 Spiral Abyss run, actually my hands are quite toasty because believe me, we are at 48 degrees top and 44 degrees bottom. Ouch. That's hot. Of course, we're going to compare all these results with the previous tests that I've done with all these other phones, and hit the thumbs up if you like the video so far. But let's go through the last set now, which is after all these fights, the phone is at its hottest point. We're gonna go and take a walk in different places. First one being this Dragon Spine section, which is quite taxing due to the busy street, I say. Now we can already see the GPUs again maxed out. Frame rate starts at the low 30s and slowly goes up to the 40 at the end of the passage. But then moving on to Liyue, things took a nice turn because this quick walk to Catherine was nice and smooth at around 50 FPS. Finally, on Inazuma, we can see the same thing happen, around 50 FPS performance even when I'm slowly moving the camera left and right. Everything is very smooth, which is great. Temperatures, on the other hand, smoothly goes up too. By the end of this whole benchmark, we have a phone that's 48.8 degrees hot on the top half and 44 degrees in the bottom half. The back top side is around 1 degree less as usual, although interestingly the bottom side is only shy of 42 degrees, but still the phone was damn hot. We'll talk about this in a minute, but first let's take a look at the benchmark result and see what we can learn from this test. Firstly, 44.2 average FPS. While that looks okay, much better than the F4 GT with Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, comparing this to the other Dimensity 8100 Poco X4 GT, we see that across the board, everything is just better on the Poco. And that phone is much cheaper, mind you. What gives? Well, if you've watched the Poco X4 GT video, you'll know that it has a rather curious 50 FPS limit, but it stays at 50 pretty much all the time, which leads to one of the closest thing I could get to a smooth 60 FPS gameplay. Now I think the Realme shows you the other side if you choose to unlock the 50 FPS limit and let the Dimensity 8100 go full power. Just look at the graph. The Realme, which is drawn in blue, is nothing like the solid line on the Poco X4 GT, which you can see graphed in green. Instead, we are now approaching the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 line, which is the purple one that are full of fluctuations, even though not as severe, but you feel that in your overall gameplay. Not only that, temperature also suffered greatly as the chip is being pushed 100% of the time, resulting in the hottest phone I've ever tested to date at almost 49 degrees Celsius. Although average power is extremely low at 2.7 watts, so the chip is really efficient. At the end of this 12-minute session, I only used up 4% battery, but there's just nowhere for the heat to go, so that's a problem. Anyway, just to quickly mention it here, despite a very long initial load time, we can see that the in-game load time in various places is as good as the F4 GT or any other devices I've tested, so no worries on that part. So, what can we learn from this test? Actually, it's only one thing. Mobile gaming will always be limited by heat. It doesn't matter if it's Qualcomm or MediaTek, or if it's stainless steel vapor chamber or diamond thermal gel stuff, a small phone form factor will get hot in a matter of minutes, and if you don't have an external fan to remove that heat, all kinds of problems crop up. But getting back to the topic, the Realme does perform better than the F4 GT, although from this test, I actually appreciate more how the Poco X4 GT managed to strike the best balance between heat, performance, and most importantly, price. This thing is an amazing value for gaming phone, along with another years old chip that still shines bright until today, the Snapdragon 870, which is also actually in the Realme GT NEO 3T. One more thing to keep in mind, because of how screen refresh rate works, it's always better to play at a locked 30 FPS, which would exactly match half of the 60Hz refresh rate screen and feel more fluid as a result. And all these phones, including the F4 GT, will perform well if you turn down the settings and play at 30 FPS. So no problems in that part. And with that said, I'll have the second part coming soon where I go through the benchmarks and more games like COD Mobile, PUBG, Apex Legends. I'll put it here when it arrives. And in case you missed my comparison video of the Realme versus Poco F4 GT, you can watch it right here. Thank you for watching. This is Kenneth, signing out.